Hi, I'm Charles X. White with Charity Productions, the Executive Director, your host for today. We're here today at the global studios of GenuineJourneyMedia.com. Thank you for viewing this discussion. This is a series, Houston, a global city for solutions, or Ground Zero for disparities. The disparities that we're talking about specifically today are a gang injunction related with the Harris County DA and the Harris County Attorney have filed against 92 young black men and banning them for life to ever come back to their neighborhood. There's a lot of discussion about this in the Houston area at this point, and this is what our discussion is in our panel. First, we want to show you a clip from the news of February the 18th at the Community Partnership Exchange Breakfast, the largest in the state of Texas of its type. The gang injunction, we believe, is unconstitutional. And obviously, 6 attorneys also believe that it's unconstitutional. So we want you to get a sense of what this is about from the news clip. Join us for our panelists and our discussion, and we look to see you for the entire series. Oh, we want to thank Attorney Kevin Fulton for his contribution and underwriting of the refreshments, and Senator Rodney Ellis. Of course, we cannot leave the senator out. We want to thank Senator Ellis for his letter to the DA and the county attorney in this matter. Let's go to the clip.
Funny how the media covers white riots versus black protests.
News.
Seems like when the protesters are black, the media uses some pretty harsh words.
The bad guys. Lawlessness, looting.
Wild animals.
Criminals and thugs.
Thugs. Isn't it the right word?
However, if you're white and you're tearing up the city because of a game, you're just young people.
Young people danced on a flipped-over car as UK fans did stupid things.
Some maybe got a little out of control.
Seeing a scene like this just shows how passionate the UK fans are.
It's so tough to lose, and unfortunately the ugly side that we sometimes see in sports.
And notice how the police always show up to a black protest in military-grade equipment, and yet the media claims they're just doing nothing.
It's inexplicable why the police are doing nothing.
Let's mobilize the National Guard.
If I'm a rioter and I see the police doing nothing, I might feel like I have a license.
You would.
But at white riots, the cops actually are standing around doing nothing.
Another group of cops over there just standing there.
No one was really doing anything.
These guys look like they could be watching a parade. And why is it that the leadership of the black community is always called into question?
Where is the leadership?
Leadership.
The black leadership.
The absence of leadership.
And it goes back to leadership, but that leadership has to come from the community.
But no one ever questions the leadership of white parents who let their kids burn down and vandalize their college campus.
These are just young college students who think they're playing some kind of a game with police officers.
You know, sometimes they don't even call a white riot a riot.
Party gone awry.
Some fans got a bit too rowdy after the win.
A dispute, a bloody brawl.
There was some type of altercation.
Waco, 170 arrested, 9 people dead.
They're not thugs.
Baltimore, no deaths, but it's a riot, chock full of thugs.
Thugs.
Just thugs. What if the media portrayed white rioters, same as black protesters? Let's switch the audio and see how it plays out.
Breaking news, violent protest.
What you're looking at is the unraveling of the civil society.
Criminals and thugs.
And they're raising hell and they're destroying property.
These idiotic thugs, rioting and looting, are hurting their own people.
Wild animals burning buildings down.
Especially if they know the media's all there, right? Got the cameras on everyone. It's become its own reality show.
Who acts like that towards a police officer?
Think for yourself. Don't let racist media color your perceptions. Demand fairness in media coverage. Tell the media to put an end to calling black people thugs.
The following is a production of Texas Lutheran University. For more information, please visit tlu.edu.
I'm Ashley McEachern. I am here with Michelle Alexander. She's a civil rights advocate and author of The New Jim Crow, Mass Incarceration in the Age of Colorblindness. Thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you.
Your book covers a lot of complex issues, race, the justice system. How do you talk about these issues to college students, and why should they be concerned with the issues? that you discuss in your book?
Well, I think young people should be critically concerned with these issues because, in my view, mass incarceration is the most pressing racial justice issue of our time. And historically, young people have been at the forefront of movements to dismantle systems of oppression and control and to challenge the status quo when it is revealed to be unjust. And it's really my great hope and prayer that young people of this generation will awaken to the reality of what mass incarceration is and the harm that it has done, and will raise their voices and organize in a way that will end not just this latest caste-like system, mass incarceration, but also build a new moral consensus that will prevent anything like it from ever emerging again.
Do you see an interest among students once you speak to them, or maybe they find out more about these topics?
Absolutely. There are so many myths that sustain the system of mass incarceration. The myth that our prison explosion has been driven by crime and crime rates, which is not true. The myth that people of color are more likely to use or sell illegal drugs. It's not true. There's so many myths about this system that once they're dispelled and people recognize the magnitude of the harm that's been done, they're eager to take action. And I find especially encouraging the fact that on campuses around the country now, there's student groups forming, Students Against Mass Incarceration, on a number of campuses around the country where students are coming together and saying, we want to define our role and find our voice at this time. And I find that just so encouraging and a real hopeful sign.
Yeah, that's great. I guess going back to, you're talking about the myth with concerning using and drugs and who is, I guess, distributing or using. You're going to be talking about mass incarceration used as a tool for social control. How does that tie into the war on drugs? And has the war on drugs, in fact, done more harm than good?
Yes, absolutely. It has. The war on drugs has really been the engine of mass incarceration. Within a 30-year period of time, our nation's prison population quintupled. Which is extraordinary, the rate of increase in such incredibly short period of time. And much of that increase was driven by the war on drugs. For example, between 1985 and 2000, the period of our greatest expansion of our prison system, more than half of the increase in the state prison population and 2/3 of the increase in the federal prison population was due to drug convictions alone. Drug convictions have increased more than 1,000% since the drug war began. So this war on drugs really has been the mechanism by which young people, particularly young black and brown men, have been targeted by the police, stopped, frisked, searched, arrested for, typically, minor, nonviolent, drug-related offenses, swept into the criminal justice system. And then once you're swept in, you're really trapped for life. Even if you're lucky enough to get just felony probation, you will acquire a criminal record that will follow you for the rest of your life and authorize legal discrimination against you in employment, housing, access to education, and public benefits. So this war on drugs has turned out to be less of a war on a substance or set of substances, and instead more of a war on a group of people defined largely by race and class, and it has served to relegate millions to a permanent second-class status, not unlike the second-class status occupied by African Americans, in an earlier era.
Why do you think we as a nation are so concerned with punishing people for possessing marijuana or nonviolent crimes and putting them in prison for nonviolent crimes and things that aren't, as, I guess, violent as we, would think of other offenses? Why are we so focused on that in this country?
Well, you know, it's interesting because we're not obsessed with punishing all people for minor, nonviolent drug-related offenses. We're focused on punishing some people for those crimes, and who does time for these nonviolent drug offenses are overwhelmingly black and brown, even though studies have consistently shown for decades that people of color are no more likely to use or sell illegal drugs than whites. You know, poor folks of color have been targeted at grossly disproportionate rates. In some states, 80 to 90% of all drug offenders sent to prison have been African American. So this punitive impulse hasn't been directed at all drug users. If you're, you know, white and live in a relatively privileged neighborhood and you possess marijuana, the odds are extremely small that you're going to be stopped and frisked and searched by the police. And even if you get caught with marijuana, you know, the odds of you actually going to jail or doing prison time for that offense are, you know, slim to none. But for people of color, the odds are high. And, you know, what is that punitive impulse about? Our impulse to punish poor folks of color for these relatively minor crimes that go largely ignored, you know, in other communities. I think that impulse, unfortunately, is linked to our racial history. It's due to racial stereotypes, anxieties, fears, and resentments that linger on and that we have not fully overcome, even as we elect our nation's first black president, and, you know, all appearances, on the surface at least, you know, suggest that we're moving in the right direction.
And that actually was my third question, was what do you say to people who argue that race is no longer an issue? And you just made a very, very valid case for why it definitely still is. What do you think we're moving forward with this younger generation of people, say maybe 18 to 25? Do you feel that it's becoming less of an issue, or they care more about it and they recognize the problem that it still is?
Well, you know, appearances can be deceiving. And on the surface of things, I think it appears as though we've made great progress in race relations. Obviously, the election of Barack Obama, which something that would have been unthinkable, you know, several decades ago, shows that attitudes have changed in important ways on issues of race. But at a deeper level, on a more unconscious level, our beliefs about who's deserving and who's undeserving, who's more likely to be violent and criminal, who's lazy and unwilling to work. Our ideas about certain populations defined by race have remained remarkably constant over time, even if it's become impolite to say it out loud. And even if many of these stereotypes, you know, we don't want to admit to ourselves we may have. One of the most fascinating things that, you know, I think psychologists have discovered in recent years is how much racial bias people of all colors harbor, even when they have no desire at all to be racist, and how alarmed people are to discover that, you know, if they're given a simulated test where they're, you know, shown images in a split second and have to make decisions about whether they're going to shoot, you know, an imaginary intruder, how likely they are to shoot, you know, the black imaginary intruder rather than the white, how likely employers are to deny job opportunities to African Americans but grant, you know, identically qualified, you know, white folks a shot at the job. And, you know, so these stereotypes and attitudes continue to drive decision-making by individuals, attitudes, perceptions, and, you know, at a larger societal level, they manifest themselves through the kinds of get-tough, punitive policies aimed at, you know, folks locked in ghetto communities, even while we consciously like to believe that we're colorblind and somehow past all of that.
So we've come a long way, but we still have a long way to to go.
Yes, and although, I think that it's a mistake to think of it just in purely linear terms. Because in so many ways, these systems of racial and social control have morphed and changed. And to say, are we better off today than we were during the Jim Crow era depends a lot upon where someone finds themselves within any given system of racial or social control. So for example, if you're a young black man, would you rather be living in the Jim Crow era in the South, but be living at home with both parents who are there and present for you and may be employed, and you may have to sit at the back of the bus and suffer a lot of shame and humiliation, but you're not doing a life sentence for first-time drug possession? The U.S. Supreme Court has upheld life sentences for first-time drug offenses against an Eighth Amendment challenge that such sentences are cruel and unusual punishment. And so there's people doing life sentences, sometimes in solitary confinement, for relatively minor crimes. Are they better off or worse off? And the social forces, the racial attitudes and anxieties that created the Jim Crow regime are the same ones that, in a different fashion, helped to give birth to mass incarceration. And so I think rather than saying, how much further do we have to go, I think it's more important to say, what is the work that's necessary to dismantle this latest system of control and to ensure that nothing like it is ever born again in the United States, or for that matter, anywhere else in the world.
Well, thank you very much for sharing your knowledge with us, and we look forward to your speech tonight. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you.
Students at TLU engage in high-impact educational experiences that include civic engagement, aesthetic expression, critical thinking, and a focus on intercultural knowledge in a community that welcomes the interplay of faith and reason.
Okay, we're back. Those two clips can give you a visual understanding of what we are talking about as relates to discrimination in the 21st century, the new Jim Crow, media bias, and those types of conditions that help depress a neighborhood. I'm going to have to exit, but I'm sure that this panel will deal with the solutions and the mass incarceration conversation very well. Thank you for joining us. We want to thank again Senator Ellis, Attorney Kevin Fulton, Genuine Journey Studios, Attorney Sarah Guidry, Attorney Vivian King, Attorney and Urban Planner Kimberly Mickelson, and our existing panelists.
Thank you, Brother White, for what you have done, and thanks Charity Productions, a community-based organization, a true service provider. And I'm honored to be joined with this particular group to further discuss some of the issues that are impacting the Houston, Harris County, and even America to some extent. To my left, as has been said, a council member and former Mayor Pro Tem, Judon Boney. I've known him for a number of years, and had the opportunity to serve as police chief, and he was the Mayor Pro Tem on Houston City Council, and I can tell you from personal experience, when it comes to running a large city, whether you're on council, the mayor's office, or police chief, it's a full-time task, and there are issues that pop up from day to day. And to my right is a judge, Your Honor, Clyde Litztag. Pleased to have you on the panel today to engage in these discussions, because many of the issues that impact a society today, many of them are on the civil side of the equation. They are. And in addition to that, there's an absolute nexus in many cases between criminal law and civil law, that they're not mutually exclusive. There are things that you can do on the criminal side that will land you in civil court in addition to the criminal stuff you've been involved in, and vice versa. There are things you can do on the civil side that can get you over on the criminal side. You know, people think they're mutually exclusive. You know, as an example, I had a distant relative of mine a few years back involved in a civil case, and just thinking it's civil law, the most I can lose is money, is what she said. But no, it turned out that some documents were falsified, etc. Then that flipped over to the criminal side real quickly. It did. So there are nexuses. When you look at injunctions, eviction notices, and all of that, so they're intertwined. And certainly I'd be remiss if I didn't thank Ms. Esperanza Martinez, criminal justice major from the University of Houston downtown. Thank you, and thanks to Professor Treadcraft again for allowing you to participate in this particular forum today. Having said that, look, let's move right into it. Let me start by, on my left side, asking Councilmember Boney, what has been the impact of mass incarceration? Let's start the discussion there. Outline some of the impact, if you will, of mass incarceration.
Well, the enhanced collapse of black families. One of the things that in this gang injunction initiative that the Harris County Attorney and the District Attorney, Devin Anderson, Harris County Attorney Vince Ryan, in seeking to ban individuals from life from an area. I talked to a young man that was a public school teacher at the time of the first gang injunction in Houston, which was Haverstock, which was a limited, targeted area.
Apartment complex.
Apartment complex. And he said, Judon, you won't believe it, but I saw it real time. And it was actually worse after the gang injunction than it was before. I said, okay, I accept that from you. What was it that struck you? It was the absence of black men. So we've got a problem because of the mass incarceration and criminal justice policies that in our assessment, and I think the studies support this, over-penalized the situation, didn't solve the problem. And then when you have young men who've committed criminal offenses, we're not arguing that, but so 3 strikes you're out, 0 tolerance, mandatory minimums. We know that did not work. We know that. Today it extended into criminalizing truancy. So a kid skips classes and the policymakers say, well, you know, this is a terrible thing. We agree. And so they haul him into court and then require them to pay a $500 fine. How do low-income families respond to that? They don't have any money in the first place. You impose a $500 fine for a kid skipping class that the parents most likely did not know about, certainly did not support. You take children or young adults or black men who are committing nonviolent crimes, I'm not saying it's not a crime, but 20 years in prison for selling marijuana when we're dispensing it now legally for medical reasons, and in California for Colorado. I'm just saying that when we step back and look at what is the impact of these policies on our communities, we have not solved a single problem. The community is still as unsafe as it was. People are still being victimized by crime. When we know that if the public school education system is not working, then they're automatically on the road to go to the prison. It seems like maybe we ought to have early education Head Start for all children. Maybe we ought to put some resources into reading programs, because we know that most of the people in prison cannot read and did not graduate. So I guess I'm suggesting that our whole approach to healing the brokenness in our community is wrong-headed and backward.
Okay, let me ask a judge to weigh in and give your perspective on the impact of mass incarceration, and what do you think could possibly be some alternative to mass incarceration?
Well, I guess one of the things I wanted to address, when I worked at the county attorney's office for many years, I represented the juvenile board, the juvenile probation department, and there was a foundation that spearheaded an effort with juvenile detention. It was the Casey Foundation. And it was became a bipartisan effort. Everybody was on board, and it turned into putting the right people in lockup, less people in lockup, which was a win-win for everybody. And so I think that addressed this issue to some extent of putting people in lockup when they shouldn't be in lockup. I think that same initiative is now beginning with the adult system, which probably Councilman Mahoney knows more about it than I do. I'm just trying to learn about it right now. But I think that same effort is underway right now with the adult system to prevent the problem that, one of the problems that y'all were talking about, which is people being locked up that don't need to be locked up. And saving room, instead of just building more prisons, saving room for the people that really do need to be locked up. And I know we're probably going to get to this. I hope we're going to get to it. But I think, Chief, you touched on a very important issue to me during the first segment, and that is what can be done to prevent people from getting into this pipeline in the first place. How do we stop? How do we help families not be in a situation where their kids are now becoming involved with the criminal justice system? So I know we're going to get to that. I don't want to sidetrack us now, but that's a critical issue to me.